We have asked a number of people to come and respond to the work and to the ideas that have been raised here by Shlomo. And we thought that there would be an advantage in maybe picking people who have been very much involved in the peace process in the past and today are not in formal positions, and therefore they will be more able to freely express their opinions. This is a sort of a thinking tank rather than a discussion where we are talking about the traditional positions of each side. So thank you to Robert Danin, who agreed to come. He is from the American State Department. He has been in it for many years, and he has also dealt with the Middle East issue and also the Israeli-Palestinian issue. He has also been in the Security Council, National Security Council, also through the prism of the Middle East. He is a specialist and an expert in this field, and he has also been the head of the task force in the Quartet under Tony Blair that is supposed to promote the peace process between us and the Palestinians. So please, Rob, we'd be happy for you to speak.
Thank you. Thank you, Lee. It's really an honor to be here today with so many friends and former colleagues and people from whom I've learned a lot over the years. So thank you. I'm particularly honored to be on this panel with friends and colleagues I've worked with, Shlomo Brom, Ziad Abu Zayed, and especially Dubi Weissglass. When the history of relations between the United States and Israel are written during the period under Prime Minister Sharon's tenure, and the documents are revealed, I think we will learn that Dubi Weissglass played a much larger and critical role than anyone ever understood or imagined. And it will be a fascinating history, I promise you. Now, to address the comments of Shlomo, I will look at the options and assess them first. So Shlomo first mentioned the option of sitting and waiting, maybe making a few gestures. And Shlomo rightly identified why this is problematic. Demographic challenges are pressing against the status quo. The process of delegitimization against Israel in international fora make the status quo difficult. I would add three additional problems for this option, if it is one. One is that the security cooperation that exists today between Israel and the Palestinian security forces on the West Bank that provides security to the Palestinians and by extension to you in Israel is not sustainable without a political process and will deteriorate. Related to that will be the concomitant deterioration in the political situation on the Palestinian side. Put another way, the status quo only rewards those who are rejectionists and undermines those who want to reach an accommodation with Israel. Third, I would doubt that the kind of good faith gestures that you mentioned, Shlomo, would really be forthcoming from Israel. I mean, why would Israel want to give the PA something for nothing? This plays into what I think you call the fire syndrome. So a second option put forward is unilateralism, either tactical coordination or a full unilateralism, you called it. I have to say I find this also very problematic. Under this scenario, you talk about withdrawing settlers west of the barrier and building and halting settlement activity, or limiting. So why would you want to uproot 70,000 settlers or halt settlement activity for nothing? That is, why not do it and improve your relations with the world? Maybe use it to restart negotiations. It is a roadmap condition. So if you're willing to withdraw from 90% of the West Bank, what message are you sending the Palestinians? You withdrew unilaterally and absolutely from Lebanon. You withdrew completely from Egypt. You withdrew from Jordan. You withdrew from all of Gaza. And now you're going to withdraw from 90% of the West Bank. Is this going to make the Palestinians more forthcoming in a final status agreement? I would think not. So why is land for nothing better than land for peace? Now, the argument put forward is that this option allows you to be self-reliant. There's no need for third parties, well, okay. I would argue that this is making a virtue out of a necessity. I mean, what impact would such unilateralism have on other partners or potential partners, such as Jordan? What political entity would emerge in the aftermath of your withdrawal? Would it not be better to get something for it, either from the Palestinians, from another party, and show and demonstrate to the Palestinians that actually there is tangible benefits to be gained through moderation and cooperation and not through resistance? The third option that's put forward, transitional arrangements, which you state must include meaningful territorial compromises, again raises the question, what are you getting for giving up land? I mean, even more problematic for this, it seems to me, is that it is this notion of bringing Hamas into the process. I mean, your argument is you want to bring Hamas in and do a partial agreement because it's actually easier for them to meet their central ideological principles. I don't really follow the logic. I mean, you're willing to give land and maybe make a political arrangement with Hamas since it conforms to their ideology, but you're not willing to do fulfill something like the third FRD or redeploy to the September 2000 lines as called for in the Quartet with a partner that is ensuring security that is recognizes Israel. So, again, I find this problematic also because in doing so, you will further undermine those Palestinian moderates and make self-fulfilling the notion that you have no partner. But the larger flaw I found in all of this is really with the assumptions, and I have to take issue with it. You state that final status is not possible, in part because the political divisions within Israel today don't allow for it. But I don't see how then the political conditions in Israel allow for any of the options that you put forward. It seems to me that the same problems that you face in pursuing something more active that actually brings tangibles to Israel obtains in a situation where you're not gaining very much. Again, land for what? With Hamas? And a right-wing government is going to be okay with that? So, what is to be done? I would revisit your assumptions. I believe there is greater room here for change. But first of all, this requires a real paradigm shift and a real change in outlook and a real change in prioritization. So let's look at these assumptions. One, you state that there's fundamental mistrust between the parties. Absolutely right. You state that both sides are convinced that each other is not willing to make the concessions necessary for peace. Again, absolutely right. But left at that point, it does become self-fulfilling. The only way you change or even test this proposition is through negotiations. Recall, Prime Minister Olmert took power on a platform of hitkonsut. He was going to pursue your unilateral option. And where did he wind up? In negotiations, making the most far-reaching offer to the Palestinians ever. So, as Prime Minister Sharon said, what you see from here, you don't see from there. This option robs you of that opportunity to even test the proposition. Mistrust can only be overcome through forging the kind of relationships that are forged through the negotiations. Look at what happened between Tzipi Livni and Abu Allah. Who would have thunk it, as we say? Now again, your next assumption, the internal politics are too complex. Well again, if it's too complex to do a final status deal, is it not too complex to talk to Hamas or to do redeployment? Third, you talk about the regional instability. And yes, there is a natural tendency in the face of all that's happening in the region to want to hunker down and stay put because you don't know where things are going. On the other hand, there is a price for inactivity. The question is, whose side is time on, and what is time going to do to the situation? If you recall, in 1949, Ben-Gurion reached armistice agreements with your neighbors. And he made a decision, and Itamar Rabinovich detailed this very well in his book, The Road Not Taken. And he basically talks about the choice that Ben-Gurion made, which was made on an assumption that peace would come shortly after, and so the price of making the next step was not worth it. What he didn't know was that the Arab nationalist revolts were going to come soon after, and that the chances that he thought were imminent would go away. So you don't know where the future is, but you know what you have in front of you. And finally, this issue of the reliance on outsiders. You praise this you praise the sort of the option of unilateralism or the not relying on outsiders as a positive because it gives you control over everything. I would posit that this is a mistaken assumption. I think outsiders can increase the chances of reaching agreements. We've seen it demonstrated time and time again. One problem and one issue I saw myself very acutely when I headed the Quartet mission was how much Israelis and Palestinians misread one another. As much as you've lived together, as much as you know one another, as much as you speak each other's languages, the ability of each side to misinterpret one another and attribute the worst intentions for the other's actions is infinite. And oftentimes third parties can come in and say, no, that's not what was meant, and translate. And not translate linguistically, translate intentions and help moderate them. Facilitate, not impose. So I would submit that for all the options that you put forward, you need to address the real problem that exists. And that is, as Udi mentioned, that there's no real sense of urgency here. That there's a real gap between what you perceive as a national imperative and the popular perception that the situation is really not so bad. Now, I recall when I arrived as the head of the Quartet mission, I ran into one of your top security experts here, who I had known and worked with for many years, considered a friend, and still consider a friend. And he said to me, "What are you doing here? You know, you were just a deputy assistant secretary responsible for the whole region." He said, "Now you're working on the Palestinians." He said, "For me, the Palestinians are priority number 4. And he went through and listed the other issues that Israel faced as his priorities and his responsibilities in the Kiryah, and only number 4 was Israel. And I don't think that perception has changed, mamash. So only when there's really a sense of making this a top priority do I think that real change is possible. Now, how do you do that? It requires leadership. It requires public conditioning by all sides. Everyone has to move out of their comfort zone, where they actually, on the one hand, say what they want, a two-state solution, but don't really feel the need to move towards it. And until that gap is closed, I would submit, I don't really see any of the options put forward as real or viable. And that really means creating conditions, first and foremost, to condition the psychological environment. The United States has an important role to play here. The Palestinian leadership has an important role to play here. But ultimately, so does the Israeli leadership. Thank you.